Hello and welcome to another edition of Debunking the Vigilant Christian, and this episode is going to be a little different. Originally, I wanted to pull this off like a normal episode where I play a few clips from TVC and then give my thoughts and remarks on it, but I decided to do something different this time. So what's this rant of his about? Well, simply put, he's butthurt that people actually get a little angry when he tells them they're stupid and moronic and just don't get it. He essentially goes on this quote-unquote long 4-minute rant about how Christian freedom is being taken away and how his right to free speech is taken away by people who actually have the nerve to disagree with him. For one thing, TVC, no. No one is taking away your right to free speech. You can say whatever crazy shit you want on your channel. And as I've already stated, I don't want you gone. Why should I? I mean, you're funny. And I like funny. Why should I want to restrict your right to free speech if that means I don't get to call you on your crazy bullshit ever again? The second issue he raises is that apparently people are trampling all over his precious belief system. And yes, to some degree, this is of course just another manifestation of his imagined persecution complex. He hinges this rant of his on a hearsay account of one of his countrymen being quote-unquote bullied for essentially condemning homosexuality. In this case, the whole persecution thing is kinda true and kinda not. That doesn't make sense to you? Well, let me explain. For one thing, I don't care what people believe. I might think that you're misinformed, and depending on what you believe and why you believe it, might even think that you're a bit stupid, but other than that, what you get up to in your private time is no concern of mine. So why does it rub me when I hear people like his pal going on stage and essentially demanding that gay people be treated differently? Well, in this case, it's kind of like in the South Park episode Cartoon Wars 1 and 2, only in reverse. What do I mean by that? Well, the two episodes essentially deal with the issue of satire and censorship where, at one point, a character basically says that if you start censoring things to appease Muslims, then the Jews are going to come along and ask whether that steak in the Matrix has been prepared in accordance with kosher dietary habits. And if the Jews get their way, then the Catholics are going to come along, then the Hindus, then the Buddhists, then the followers of traditional Native American beliefs, etc., and claim something somewhere offended them. Until you get to a point where everything is so sanitized and clean that entertainment isn't even entertaining anymore. So in reverse, essentially what this means is that if TVC's homophobic pal is allowed to say these things, then a second person might say them, then a third, then a fourth, then a fifth, sixth, seventh, and the eighth person might actually carry a gun and start to act on this whole gay people are icky nonsense. And I can guarantee you that when the guy gets caught by the police and confesses that Mario's homophobic countryman made him do it, TVC is going to turn around and proclaim on his channel that his countryman and the killer aren't real Christians, even though TVC has been backing the former the entire time, right up until he hears of the tragedy. But getting back to the whole persecution complex thing, I think Brian Irving of Team Snob from thecinemasnob.com said it best in his review of Kirk Cameron's Saving Christmas. For one thing, you're not being fed to the fucking lions anymore, are you, TVC? At least not in the developed world. I mean, sure, there are a number of countries where Christians are oppressed, but that's a different subject entirely that I'll get into in just a minute. Irving also brought up a good point when talking about the imagined persecution complex of right-wing Christians in the US. You see, if you, as Christians in the US, Start being treated like someone in the deep American South who is either openly gay, lesbian, transgender, etc. is being treated? Then we can talk about persecution. I'm just going to take a break to let this sink in, and then continue giving my thoughts on actual Christian persecution around the world. Okay, so let's talk about Christian persecution worldwide, because this is a thing that actually happens. However, from where I'm standing, it does all come off like a cheap PR stunt. What do I mean by that? Well, let's face it, when missionaries talk about their persecution stories, most of them weren't in France, Norway, Sweden, or Spain. In most cases, it's either China, North Korea, Afghanistan, Iran, or Iraq. But you see, here's the thing. Whenever they talk about their experiences and why that happened to them, they always use the lady in the water excuse. At no point do they ever stop and think that the reason why the West, or Americans, or Christianity specifically, aren't well liked in these countries may have something to do with the history of the place. I mean, let's take China for example. It apparently never occurs to any of them that the reason the Chinese government is so apprehensive towards Christianity might be because China has, essentially, been raped by European nations, among them the German Empire, all the way from 1900 till about the time that Mao came along. And in North Korea, for example, it couldn't possibly have anything to do with the Korean War and America's involvement in it. The same goes for Iraq and Afghanistan and, to a lesser extent, Iran. As said, it's always the lady in the water excuse. It's always because the Christian message is so groundbreaking and earth-shattering that people just can't bear to listen to it. And this isn't limited to present day alone. When talking about his imagined persecution complex, TVC sometimes brings up comparison with the Christian persecutions under the Romans. And again, it has nothing to do with the fact that, quite frankly, at the beginning of the Gnostic formation that eventually became Christianity, Rome simply had some really, really shitty emperors. I highly doubt that if Caesar hadn't been assassinated and the Roman Republic had carried into what we now know as the 2nd century under consul, not emperor, Augustus, things probably wouldn't have gotten as bad as they did. And even though TVC doesn't mention it anywhere, and I just wanted to bring it up because I wanted to talk about it, with respects to the Christian persecutions in Japan in the 1500s, again, it can't possibly have anything to do with the fact that Tokugawa wanted to establish a united Japan, and that he went up against Western opposition, and to a lesser extent Christian opposition, just as hard as he did against domestic opposition. Now the question I guess you might be having is, what about the Egyptian Christians, i.e. the Coptic Christians? They're always complaining about being persecuted, and they've been in the country longer than Islam has. Well, in this respect, I'm going to have to be a kind of a dick about it and call out their hypocrisy on this. Yes, of course it's not okay for people to actually be persecuted for believing stupid things, but I do have to ask, who was it that closed all the temples, killed all the priests, and made the hieroglyphics a forbidden writing? Think about it. So this was my take on TVC's Stop Christian Bullying video. In the near future, I'll be taking a look at some of his pals' videos and we'll see what crap we have to shovel back to the crap heap there. Until then, have a good time, and stay safe.